Hey guys, this is Phil Galfond from BlueFirePoker.com. Today I'm going to be reviewing a session I played yesterday across 4 tables of 5-10 no limit, but with a little bit of a twist. This is actually a session that I almost scrapped. I almost threw away the footage just because I was probably on my C or D game when I played this session, and I felt like I wasn't thinking really at all. I guess I'll talk about first. Um, the reason I decided to keep it is that I think it's a good opportunity for me to talk about getting off of your A game, and I know that it's spoken about elsewhere, but it's not something I've talked about that much, and I also know that I could talk about it in like a PowerPoint presentation type format, but I feel like it'll be good for some people to see. Um, First of all, like those of you in denial that you have a B or C or D game, um, maybe if you realize that I have one, um, you might start to wonder if you do as well. Although probably not, knowing most poker players. And then also I could talk about some of the things I did wrong, not necessarily in the play of hands, but in I don't know. I can talk about them as they come up, but there are a lot of things looking back that I didn't do right this session, and a lot of reasons I didn't play well. Um, as far as the reason I wasn't playing well, I wasn't tilted at all. But I I'm coming off of like 2 or 3 weeks of playing just like 80-hour weeks and not sleeping very much, sleeping like 5-6 hours a night, and actually the 2 nights prior to this, probably like 4 hours. And for any of you who know me, you guys know that that's like 1/3 of what I need for my brain to function. And I've also, like in the last 2 weeks, gotten kind of addicted to caffeine as a result of not sleeping very much, and kind of a cause probably as well. But I woke up this morning, um, couldn't sleep, saw some good games running, so I rolled out of bed, even though I was exhausted. Started playing. Games broke within like 45 minutes. Nothing else running, nothing else to do, and so I was like, okay, I'll record some no limit footage for my next video. And really, just the whole time, I could tell that the thoughts that should be going through my head were not going through my head, and was not doing a lot of the right things. And I'll talk about them as they come up. I would have normally started the video, but we get involved in the hand right away on the top left. I will say that right now I'm fairly well rested and certainly well caffeinated, so I think my video review will hopefully not be as poor as my play. And even if, I don't know, if I watch it back and don't see as many mistakes as I thought I was making, there were definitely a lot of things that I was missing out on that I normally don't in terms of reads on players. So like the first example that I thought of is, I think I went this entire session, 1 hour session, without taking a note on any player. And if you've watched any of my videos, you'll see that I take notes all the time, and I look back at hands that I wasn't involved in. But it's something that just like I didn't even realize I wasn't doing it at the time. I was just like autopiloting basically, and not in a good mindset to play. And I think that what's important in terms of identifying times when you're not playing your A game are things like that, where if after 20 minutes you think to yourself, oh, I haven't taken a single note on one of these guys, or like, oh, I don't even have any reads on this player, or something like that, something you normally do. Um, I think that's a good way to be able to tell if you're off your A game, because it's hard to kind of admit it to yourself or realize it, because I don't know, you're just playing poker, you're clicking buttons, and you get dealt the same hands and do the same kind of things. Anyways, on the top left, I raise under the gun with tens, flop second set, turn a boat. I c-bet the flop, and he calls. I think the turn is fairly interesting. I ended up deciding to check, and I think actually it's a pretty decent play for a pretty decent vacuum play, as well as a pretty decent play for my overall range. This is a turn that hits him very hard, and it's a spot where I might like to check, with a hand like kings and try to get to showdown. A hand like ace 10, I might like to I'd probably barrel a lot of my draws, but it'd be nice to be able to check some draws and get him to not bet his missed draws, things like that. So uh, basically what I'm saying is my checking range here is going to be fairly weak or very weak. So to include a strong hand in my checking range, I think is something that can only be good. I think this is the absolute perfect hand to include in your checking range if you're going to include a strong hand. Because if you have, let's say, ace jack and you want to include that in your checking range, big downside of that is that he's much less likely to have a jack and more likely to have a 10. So you're missing a bet from a 10. You're less often going to be facing a bet because he's less often going to have a jack. And in this spot, there are two jacks live. There's only one 10 live. He didn't 3-bet, so I doubt he has queens plus. So I think we're very often looking at a draw or a jack. Whereas if we checked with ace jack, we're very often looking at a 10 or a draw. And the other downside, obviously, with ace jack is if we give him a free card with his 7-8 of clubs, he actually has, decent equity to improve. And here with 7-8 of clubs, he has one out. And with most of his draws, he has no outs. So I decided to check. I think it's a good play. The question is if and when he bets, which he does, is my play to raise or to call. And I think there are pros and cons to each, obviously, and sorry to start out the video so wishy-washy, but I definitely think, absent of reads on a player, I think there are very often, some very decent options in a no-limit hand, or any hand, but in big bet games especially, like you have so many options. I think that by check calling here, I'm repping a hand like ace queen of diamonds, potentially 10x. Very few monsters, I think. King king, queen queen, something like that. If he thinks I'm like, I don't know, trying to be a hero, maybe a hand just like ace king, no suit. But let's think about his range for betting. When he doesn't 3-bet, like I said, I don't think it's that likely he has a high pair. When he calls the flop, I think he probably would fold with hands like 6s and 7s, which are a big chunk of his range. Or not a big chunk, but a decent chunk of his pre-flop range. I think a lot of the hands in his range now are suited broadways. So a lot of those contain a jack. Otherwise, they have, the ace-queen, king-queen type hands. Ace-queen, I feel like he might check back, but he certainly might just bet for kind of protection, semi-bluff, bluff. Just to take it down right now with a hand that, doesn't want to face a river bet on most rivers and doesn't really know what card he wants to hit. So I think very often he will have a hand like ace-queen, potentially ace-king even. But most often I think he'll have a jack, queen-jack, king-jack, ace-jack, jack-9 suited. I'm not sure if he'd play. So yeah, I think a lot of his range is jack-x. Some of it is like the ace-high type hands. And some of it is going to be some draws. I think, there's not a huge category of hands that he's playing with, like, he's not calling a ton of, like, king-9 of clubs, things like that, king-8 of clubs. Since I raised under the gun, they're going to be pretty connected. So we're looking at, king-queen of clubs, 9-8 of clubs, 8-7 of clubs, which, doesn't make for that many combos. So I don't think it's overwhelmingly likely that he does have a draw, although it's definitely possible. Against a range that's very often a jack, I could just raise here and get it in before I potentially lose my action on a scare card. But I thought that with a hand like ace-queen or the rare clubs, maybe some ace-x of clubs type hands, I could get him to barrel some rivers. I thought, again, it would be good for my overall range to continue representing a weak hand. I think if I do check raise here, it actually does look a little bit credible as far as a bluff. So I think check raising is fine. Like if I c-bet the flop with ace-queen, decided to check the turn, and was facing a bet, I looked down at my ace-queen, I'm like, I can't really call, but I might be good, I might have a lot of outs, or decent amount of outs. I'll just check raise to 340 and fold to a jam. So I think that's a viable option as well, especially if he does have a draw and I make it like, maybe not even 340, maybe like 310. He's going to have a hard time folding his draw, and I get getting like 30, or I guess he already put 140 in, but getting another 16, 18 big blinds in with him drawing dead is definitely a good result. So again, I'm kind of on the fence between um, raising and calling, but at the time I played this, none of those thoughts were going through my head really, or like just an occasional thought. He bets the river, and I think I just have to jam. Really only worried about Queen Jack, and he certainly could have backdoored a flush, be value betting still with Ace Jack, King Jack. Um, Somehow have yeah hit a straight and value bet it. I think, and he's bluffing a lot. Not that that means anything for my jam, but I'm definitely not especially unhappy in this spot. Although I do run into Queen Jack, and it turns out pretty poor. I think if I were taking notes and paying attention, I would have noted that he called an under the gun raise with Queen Jack offsuit, which I think is slightly bad play, not terribly bad by any means, but something to note. And you'll notice when I was kind of breaking down his range, I didn't have that in mind for a part of it. So here in the top right table is a very awkward spot. Under the gun +1 raises, under the gun +2, 3 bets. I'm looking really quickly. So the initial raiser is on all my tables. This other player is on 2 of them. So both regs. Be nice to have some hands with them and some stats, but I have none at all. I think jacks are too strong to just not raise get it in here, unfortunately. And I'm not excited about it, but there's already 150 in the pot. Getting it in against Ace King is certainly good for me, or fine for me, especially with some dead money in the pot. And it's nice to, I don't know, have more hands in my value 4-bet range than just Queens plus and Ace King suited and Ace King, so that I occasionally can have a somewhat credible cold 4-bet bluff. I definitely haven't, and we know nothing about their ranges, but I haven't looked at the math on this, and I would not be shocked if this ends up being a pretty clear fold. If we look at, let's say, give him like, I don't know, 18% of hands to open under the gun +1, give this guy 3-betting, let's say he's 3-betting from this exact position, maybe 9% of hands, or let's say like 7% of hands, and a polarized range, so he's not going to have tens. So basically he has Queens plus, Ace King, and then, Jack 8 suited, 10-9 offsuit, things like that, occasionally. I would not be surprised if you work it out to, the benefit is either getting it in with Ace King or picking up 150 in the pot. The downside is getting it in with, well, even including Ace King, you're probably getting it in, I don't know, 30-some% equity for 1K. I actually would like to take some time and break down the math on that. You know what? I'm going to pause the video and see if I can figure that out. All right, I'm back. I actually did that really fast. You guys would have been impressed. I hope none of these are wrong. Basically, if they both fold, I win about $150 in the pot. If I get it in against either, I give them a range of Queens plus and Ace King, and then I noted 2.6% of hands, which is important for later. I decided an average of about 2070 would be in the pot, because if I get it in with this guy, it'll actually be 2055, and I think that's the more likely scenario. But if I get it in with this guy, there'll be the dead 100, so there'll be 2115. I just decided on 2070 as rough estimate of the average amount of money in the pot, with 36% equity, which gives us $745 in EV, which from our 1K stack is minus 255. Based on that, we need them to fold 63% of the time to break even. This is, of course, assuming we're sticking with our assumptions that they're both, first of all, that Bad Bluffer would 3-bet his Ace Kings rather than just call, and secondly, that they'd both, get these ranges in and not get in Ace Queen suited, although maybe they would. And that would affect things a little bit. Probably not Ace Queen offsuit, though, and not too many combos of Ace Queen suited. So player 1, I just made up, opens from this position 18%. I actually took a look at when you take out the every hand with a jack in it, it takes it down to 13%. So since I had two jacks, I just decided on 15% as actual estimate of. So I did top 18% of hands. Took out all the ones with jacks. It was 13. Since I have two jacks, those are all less likely. So rough estimate, 15% of hands. He's opening in this spot actually, since I have the jack blockers. And so, 2.6 of that 15 means he's shoving about 17% of the time. Player 2, we're going to say 3-bets 7%. My jack blockers don't really affect him since he's not going to be 3-betting, shouldn't be 3-betting many of these hands with jacks in them. So I didn't really take that into account. But 2.6 of that 7%. Assuming he's always 3-betting ace-king, which is a little bit of a stretch. He's probably not always 3-betting all of these hands, to be honest. But I think the fact that he might not 3-bet ace-king kind of evens itself out, maybe even works against us a little bit. But anyways, he ends up shoving 37% of the time. So 17% of the time it gets back to this guy, he shoves. The other 83% of the time, of that 83%, he folds, and then of the 83% of the time he folds, this guy shoves 37%, which equals 31%. So 17 plus 31 is 48%. We're getting shoved on a little under half the time, and we needed them to shove only 37% of the time. So actually this is a fold, a pretty clear fold if my assumptions are right. Any of you math guys, let me know if I did something wrong, or let me know what your thoughts are on that, or even non-math guys, let me know what you think about my assumptions of his opening range, his 3-betting range, what hands they'd be shoving, if they'd ever be, jamming like ace-4 suited or something like that. If any two, just for you, would ever jam like 10s or 9s here, it completely changes things. Although I think it's fairly unlikely that he would. Another thing to look at is the since my EV is negative 255, I think I ended up 3-betting to like 225 or 4-betting to like 225, 230. That actually would mean, if my ranges are right, that I have a very slight fold, but it also would mean that having jacks is basically the same in this spot as having air, and so a spot where getting in jacks here would be profitable, assuming they're not getting in worse. It'd be just as profitable to 4-bet fold with air. But yeah, I'll resume the footage. Not that I would have done that math at the time anyways, but I just was thinking jacks, let's do it. But yeah, it looks like that's a slight fold. I opened up a HUD. Though my decision is already made, I don't think it would have affected much. Actually, 21 hands is no sample at all, so his pre-flop stats are not relevant. Neither of theirs are. But they are both a little looser than average over 20 hands. I get faced with a very interesting decision here when he clicks it back. I don't really know what to make of his range. I really thought I was looking at aces very often, and definitely considered folding. I think after looking at that calculation, and realizing that if he just has ace-king and queens plus, this actually is just a very, very slight fold. I think I would have folded to this min 5-bet, which actually makes it a little more likely he has aces and less likely he has ace-king. I tanked a little bit, almost folded, and I think I ended up deciding to give him a lot of credit, and by that I mean deciding that he might jam with aces and make a small 5-bet with a hand like ace-king that he's going with, or ace-queen suited, in order to, hopefully semi-bluff me off of a hand like this. But in hindsight, I think that was a little bit wishful thinking on my part, and I think I think this is potentially a fold twice around, or maybe even a cold call. It's always awkward to cold call with jacks because it looks like you have jacks or tens. So it's very tough to play post flop. Um, I think I don't mind just folding there after looking at that math. I did run into aces and lose. I mean, a tiny bit of a cooler, but I think I could have folded. The fact, though, that I can't be getting in jacks there. I mean, if we look at queens instead, I think it would come out plus EV, just because there are fewer hands that we are 20% against, just aces and kings. And obviously they fold some. Occasionally they jam jacks, so it's a much better proposition. But that's, I guess, a little disheartening that my range has to be so tight there to cold 4-bet, and it basically can't cold 4-bet bluff there very often unless I'm going to start making people fold ace king or queens, which I'm not. Down here, another interesting hand. There's a under the gun raise, under the gun +1, small 3-bet. I actually think cold calling might have been good here. I decided to 4-bet small and get it in, hoping that he was doing this with a hand like ace queen, ace jack suited, hoping he thinks I read his small sizing as weakness and just decides to go with it. Ace king is a hand that plays a lot better pre-flop than post-flop in a lot of situations, but in this specific case, I really don't mind just calling. Because I think it plays fairly well in position and very disguised when they think I have a hand. Most of the time, I think like tens or jacks. I think I can exercise a lot of pot control in position, and the final benefit is that if I cold call and someone back here shoves, or the under the gun raiser shoves, and the 3-better shoves as well, or calls it off, I can get out of the way with ace king and have only lost $65. But I decided to look tough and keep my 4-betting frequency high, which I don't think is terrible by any means. You don't mind taking down the 100 in the pot right now. He snap calls, and I was actually very worried that meant a very strong hand. However, because it was so small, I decided that it actually was fairly likely. He had a hand like, I don't know, jack 9 suited, that he didn't want to call under the gun raise with, or perhaps this under the gun raiser is a fish. I don't see him on any other table, and this guy potentially is a reg, although I see him up here, and is just trying to isolate the fish with whatever hand he wants to play. So he could have some suited broadways, things like that. Because of that, and just because of the risk reward, I think just betting small here ends up showing the most profit, and I obviously balance and do that with my whole range. But checking back, I think, allows him to hit a draw, allows him to bluff me off the best hand, and I think it's a very tough spot for him. I don't think that he's gonna check jam sevens here. So even if he decides to play, I think it's very often going to be with a call, in which case I can see a free river if I'd like, or semi-bluff jam the turn, or hit one of my outs on the turn. I decided to 3-bet on the top left with king-queen offsuit, which is fine, somewhat standard. One other thing that I was doing this session, or not doing this session, was you'll notice I opened up the HUD, and I looked back after the session and realized that I hadn't really looked at any stats. And I know that I don't have a sample on any of these guys, but towards the end of the video, I had like a 70 hand sample on some people, or actually like 200 on some of the multi-tablers. And I think the only thing I looked at occasionally was pre-flop stats, like 3-bet and folds 3-bet and opening stats. And I just think that for me to go, I don't think it cost me that much. I didn't play that many hands, but for me to go a whole session never looking at people's post-flop tendencies, how often they fold the flop, how often they c-bet, how often they c-bet the turn. Um, I think it just shows again how much I was autopiloting and not really thinking. So top left, I've decided to min-raise the button for this session. I flopped top pair, backdoor diamonds, gut shot, and decided to check the flop. I think his range is going to very often be like suited broadways, suited low cards, small pairs, and suited broadways are doing very well against me. Small pairs are just folding and I'm crushing them. Suited small cards are folding and I'm crushing them. So the vacuum play I think is pretty clearly to check. As far as my overall range, this isn't such a strong hand in my range that I feel obligated to bet it. I turn the flush draw, actually the straight flush draw, the royal flush draw, and I also turn a straight. I think the best play here is to bet. I think I very often would check back this flop, or he would think I would check back this flop with some air, and because of that, he certainly isn't going to fold two pair. And at the same time, I don't think I open myself up to many bluff check raises, as I very easily could have an ace here. Not so easily could have a flush, but potentially could. And I do have the king of diamonds, so I could actually call a check raise and fold rivers pretty confidently, I think. So in a spot where I don't expect to get raised, and I do expect to get some value, I think pretty clear bet. And I'm going to 3-bet queens on the bottom left. And there's no value on the river here. And yeah, he had a straight with no flush draw. And I think we both played the hand fine. I get 4-bet, and I'm going to jam, obviously, with queens. I don't think very much to talk about. I do run into aces once again. But I don't feel I made a mistake this time. But especially for big bet, there are so many things that I do when I play that that I don't do when I'm autopiloting. I was actually watching a friend and student of mine play some No Limit the other day. Here I get 3-bet. I consider 4-betting for a while, with the ace blocker, and I ended up just deciding to fold. I think people don't give you very much credit in a blind battle. Anyways, I was watching student play, and I could tell that he was on autopilot, and there were so many hands that I 3-bet up here, pretty standard. I don't have to, but I do. There were so many hands where he just wasn't, I don't know, wasn't paying much attention to their bet sizing, or paying much attention to his bet sizing, and just not making any surface mistakes, but in my opinion made so many clear reading your opponent and leveling and things like that, mistakes in that fashion. And I think that you can look through somebody's session or look through all the big hands you played and not catch yourself making any mistakes. You could be playing quote unquote perfectly, but really what separates a really strong big bet player from an average one or a pretty good one are all the small edges you gain in hand reading and leveling, and those end up paying off huge because it's a big bet game. Deception, what you did the last couple times, what they did the last couple times, what that's going to mean, especially in heads up. I think that's huge. And I think that I do get, obviously I get asked the question all the time, what separates, the guys who can beat up 25-50 from, and higher, from the very strong players who play 5-10 but just can't make the jump. And I think that's the majority of what it is. I mean, all this stuff that I'm talking about, playing your C game and not doing that is important, and that's more important for just maintaining a bankroll and steadily moving up and keeping your win rate high. But as far as really making the big jump and getting up there, it's all the really, really tough players are thinking about so much, and they're thinking about what every decision their opponent makes means, and they're not just like looking at his stat and saying, "Oh, he folds the turn bets 55%. I'm going to bet turn with most of my hands." I think that's and like yeah, just well, there's I have second pair, no value here. I check. Um, he raised. He hasn't raised in a while, so probably has it. I fold. Like if you're just making simple surface decisions, I think you're costing yourself a lot, and I think that's what's going to keep you at 2-4 no limit, or keep you at 1-2 no limit, or whatever it is. Um, King six offsuit. I usually would call in the big blind in position. I like to play a lot of pots in position. I know that it's not very significant, but he's played 12 hands and not played a single one, and I decided to fold. I mean, I think not a very important decision either way. On the top right, I make the same kind of bet that I did on the other table. I just think it's the best, especially in position. Well, no, it's out of position also good as well, but just yeah, the best risk reward play. Um, it just is so difficult for them to do anything about, and it's so cheap for you. So even if they are check raise bluffing occasionally, I mean, it's 75 to win 200. So they're going to have to check raise bluff a lot, as well as value raise thinly. Like on a board like this, they're not going to be raising less than a jack for value, I would think, unless they slow played like aces or kings potentially. But even then, they might not, and they might not always raise a jack. So when they have a very small, and the same thing is true on the other hand, where I had ace king on 3-4-4, they like have almost no value check raising range, which means that they shouldn't have much of a check raise bluffing range, which means that you're not going to face a check raise very often. So even if you do get called, you get a chance to hit some of your outs. And when somebody is playing really strong and adjusting to this and starting to check raise with I don't know, like let's say they start to check raise with 10-9 of hearts, hoping to induce a small 3-bet and a fold, or like they start to check raise with tens here for value because they realize how even that though, it's just so tough to check raise tens here for value and expect to get stacks in good or get much money in good. Um, I feel like the only way they can adjust is to start check raising with air most of the time, and that's going to be hopefully something that you can pick up on pretty quickly and fight back at, because if they're check raising air with any kind of frequency and they have almost no value check raising range, then obviously you're going to have very profitable call downs or 3-bet bluffs. So on the top left table, this player opened the small blind and check called the flop. I think very often it's going to be like an ace-high type hand, sometimes a jack, sometimes pocket sevens, occasionally slow play with a very strong hand. I think it's a pretty odd line on a board like this, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. Had I not turned some outs, I would have shut down. But turning the flush draw, I don't know. I think that he can potentially fold his ace-high or fold his sevens or something like that, and if he does have a jack, I'm not putting money in that bad. And I am building a pot as well for when I hit my draw. And I decide not to fire the last barrel here, as I think he very often has a jack now that he's called twice. He actually did check call with ace high with some backdoors, turn the 10, and pretty standard once he decides to check the flop. I definitely think if you're the type of player that ends up, or like you really do notice that you're autopiloting very often, that you're on your C game very often, I think developing a routine for when you play, either in between sessions or like during sessions or before you play. Like if I made a rule that before I play every morning I wake up, let's say I'm still hooked on caffeine, I wake up, grab like a small bite to eat, a coffee, take a shower, and then sit down. And that's actually what I did before recording this video, because I woke up groggy again today and didn't want to give you guys a bad review of a bad session I played. But I think doing things like that, or like waking up and going for a run, Not that I'm ever ambitious enough to do that. Um, but things like that are just so huge for your focus and motivation. I actually think that if I did some sort of like 15-minute workout before I played every time, my results would be a lot better. But still haven't motivated myself to do it. I decided to 3-bet on the bottom left with Jack 8 suited. I think fine and standard. On the top right, I made a what do you call it? Like reading. I read the situation wrong. I thought we were heads up. I thought it was heads up with the small blind. I didn't notice that the big blind had a hand, and I actually decided to check back for the delayed c bet, since this is. I thought it was very credible. This is a board that I wouldn't be checking back with air very often. In a three-way pot, I would be checking back with air more often. So I think that my delayed c bet doesn't work that well. However, still just not a bad spot to check back in a three-way pot, just because you expect to get a decent amount of action. Although, since I min-raise the button, their ranges are wider, and this is, I've talked about before, experimenting with new raise sizes and how it puts you in spots that you're not really familiar with. And this is a spot where I'm not used to them having looser ranges. When I open the button, I'm used to some tighter ranges, so I'm used to them having hands they can continue with very often on this flop and turn. Although this turn's, pretty brickish. So maybe a c bet is better than I realize in a spot like this. Anyways, they both checked to me. I decided to bet. I'm fine with it. I think I shouldn't be expecting too many check raises, and I should be expecting calls from like fives or sixes, and I really don't mind them folding Jack 10 and Ace High and things like that with outs. I do, however, face a check raise, and I think it's a good spot for a bluff check raise. A great spot for it, actually, just because I very rarely have a queen. I very rarely have two pair. Even the best hand I can have there, I mean, I can have pocket sevens, but I'm never really slow playing the flop, so maybe a hand like 7-5 of spades is like the best hand I can bet call with there. Potentially, I don't know, like queen 5 suited, something like that, that I decided to check the flop with. But I think he's going to show tremendous profit with that check raise after I've shown that I'm not that interested in the hand on the flop. He checks, so JD Killer, I think, would bet most of his strong hands. Like, he's never in a spot where he's checking a strong hand here, I believe, at least. Or very rarely, until we've developed some history of this happening very often. Because he's not expecting me to bet that often. He's not expecting Virus to have a hand. Or like a strong hand. So he should be value betting all of his queens, 100% of his queens, all of his hands better than a queen. So the check raise looks like he's trying to go through two people, but I mean, in reality, he's facing a very weak hand that's almost definitely folding by JD Killer, and a pretty weak hand from me. I can't have too much in the way of strong hands. So I don't know what he had. I don't know if he was bluff check raising, but I think it's a hugely profitable spot for a bluff check raise, and that's the kind of play that, if you're focused, you pick up on and would make that play. And it's a play where he picked up, I don't know, what's in the pot? 10 big blinds. He picks up 10 big blinds. I mean, obviously that's not his EV, but I would say his EV here is plus $25 on this play, maybe $20. That's a rough guess. So adding 2 big blinds to your win rate in just one hand where you don't have anything, and people who are autopiloting just check fold and don't think of it again, don't give it a second thought. That's where the great players make their money, is all these small edges. And I mean, I don't have to tell you guys, but you pick up 2 big blinds every once in a while, and your win rate is now much, much higher. And players that do that, I've talked about it before, I call them high-intensity players. And I think it's really important to identify what players are high intensity, and don't miss opportunities like that, and what players are not and are just kind of autopiloting and play their hands. And against a high intensity player like that, that's a spot where you want to be very deceptive, and you want to be checking back that flop with strong hands, for the hope that something like that happens, and checking the turn more often because you'll think that they see it as a very good spot to check raise, whereas somebody who's just autopiloting would just give up on the pot very easily and just check call, with pocket fives or check fold everything else or bet out with a queen. I think that people autopiloting are how I make most of my money, most of the time, since I'm not really I'm mostly playing with full-time pros, so it's not like I'm gaining huge edges all over the place. But yeah, I mean, at 5'10", if you're playing with pretty much all pros, I believe. So picking up those, like, every small edge you can gain matters, and that brings me back to not playing your B and C game and making sure that you're playing the best that you can all the time. And I think that obviously the softer the game is, like if there's an insanely soft game and I know that I'm tired and I know I'm on my B game, sometimes I just still know I have a pretty high expected value playing in the game just because of how soft the game is. And obviously I should still do what I can to try to get myself off of my B or C game and onto my A game, but oftentimes if you can't, if you're just too tired and you're not going to be playing your best, you can still play in some games if they're great games. I just think that, I don't know, people that especially if like you set aside time to play every day, and you're like, I'm going to play from noon to 8 p.m. every day. And I think that can be a good and bad thing. But the problem is sometimes you're just not in the mood to play. Either you don't feel well, you're tired, you're distracted by something else, or most importantly, like I definitely play my best when I really badly want to play poker. And that happens to me a lot. Like I really love the game, and I love the competition. There are times when I'm really excited to play and really focused, and those are the times that I play or try to play like 80, 90-hour weeks. And there are other weeks where I just don't really care. I feel like I should play, just because that's, I guess, my job. But those are times that I'm just not playing my best. And even though I could potentially still be a favorite in a lot of lineups, I think just making yourself play oftentimes doesn't work out very well. And playing when you're excited about playing is hugely, hugely profitable. And so anyways, yeah, if you are the type of guy that, or girl, that sets aside time to play every day, or I don't know, is on kind of a schedule. I mean, this definitely happens if you're like out for the World Series and you have to play certain events. You're definitely going to be playing some worse than others because you're kind of locked into it. But in a cash game, you can quit any time, and I think that there's absolutely nothing wrong with quitting, even if you think you're going to have like a slightly small win rate. If you're unfocused, first of all, you might be overestimating your win rate in the first place, given that you're not on your A game. But more importantly, I think first of all, I made a light 3-bet on the bottom left. First of all, you are not really going to be enjoying yourself if you're not excited about playing. I mean, we all play poker for different reasons, and I don't think, for those of us who are pros, you're mostly playing to earn money. But, I mean, not to get all philosophical, but then, why do you want to earn money in the first place? Like, because it leads to other things that make you happy, or the success makes you happy, things like that. Where really the end goal is just being happy. And if you're going to be miserable while you play, take those 3 hours of your life and do something else that makes you happy. Unless like you really feel like you have a strong edge and you have immediate bills to pay or things like that. I think just don't make yourself play. And the other benefit is that the more time you take off of poker when you don't feel like playing, I think, at least in myself, I've found that the more hunger I have for the game, and if I take a week off because I don't feel like playing, I think I much more quickly am excited about playing again. Uh, and if I just like grind all the way through when I don't feel like it, then I continue to not really care about poker, or not really be that interested in it, and I just kind of view it as what I have to do every day. So on the bottom right, I raise a small blind, I c-bet, and I decide to give up on this turn. I don't hate betting. Um, I mean, he's not going to fold a better hand ever, but you have at least 6 outs, or not at least. You have 6 outs against most of his hands, and you also prevent yourself from getting bluffed by a hand like uh, Jack 10, Queen 10, things like that. Although Jack 10 is not going to fold the turn, Queen 10 might. Um, but yeah, you prevent yourself from getting bluffed by some hands, and have some outs against some other hands. If he does have, a 9 or 7 somehow, or a deuce. If he has a king, you have 3 outs. But I don't mind betting there, but I just decided to check fold. I think I'm not getting a ton of folds on the turn. And I think this is actually a good point to wrap up the video. I think I have enough for 2 more videos, although I think one more video from this series will be sufficient, probably, of getting my point across. You guys don't need to see me play badly for 3 hours. But yeah, I guess we didn't see that much in the way of mistakes that I made, because we didn't get through that many hands. We stopped for that analysis of the 4-bet and in general for my rambling. But there are some hands later on that I play really poorly, and I think for the most part, even if the actual hand doesn't look that bad, I was definitely missing out on a lot of things and not thinking through their ranges and my ranges and what they'd expect me to do. Just like not thinking through all the levels that you should be thinking through. And that's, what happens when you're not on your game. And I'm actually glad that I decided not to scrap this footage, and I think that although you won't see me making many sick plays or doing anything really great at the tables, I think we could still analyze the hands after the fact, and we can also, I think it's important for you guys to see me play badly, in order, like I said before, to admit to yourself that you likely do as well sometimes. But as always, let me know your thoughts and comments. Not sure next week if I'll come back with another edition of this, or I'll go back to the PLO review of Don's game, which you guys have really liked, and I think has been really interesting. But I'll hop back and forth. And yeah, I will see you guys next week. This is Phil Galfond for BlueFirePoker.com. Take care, guys.